about what I was going to talk with the kids about. This is a passage that has a little bit of a troubling piece in it because it has something that little kids will not stand for. It's a story that has budging. You heard it. There was a woman who budged in line of the healing that was supposed to take place. Jesus was on his way to heal a little girl, and this woman budged. And you know, sometimes you have to wonder, the people there, did they think maybe Jesus didn't have enough juice to heal both? Were there people in that crowd who wondered, well, is she not going to get anything now? But here we see a story that shows us the abundance of God's love and power. That it's not just this woman who cut in line to be healed, but this little girl receives healing too. See, we have a God of abundant hope and abundant grace and abundant love. And that is something to be happy about today. And with that, I do also want to share one other thing, is that healing stories in the Bible are one of the hardest topics to preach on. And today we see two of them sandwiched here in this one passage, because I think they're kind of a double-edged sword. They proclaim, look, here is the power of God, here is what God can do. But then we sit with the question, so why is it that so many go without healing, even when they fervently pray for it? If God can, then why doesn't God act? See, these stories are a reminder of God's transcendence, of God's immense power, God's otherness. They can lead us to joy, but if we sit with them and these questions for too long, we can also fall into sorrow. See, here in this passage, we see Jesus go beyond what even the faithful could hope for. A young girl of 12 who is not just healed, she is resurrected from death. And another young woman who was not only healed, but welcomed openly into God's family. See, this is a gospel with so many layers, so many turns to the story, and let's be honest, so many verses, that we could probably preach on this one for a solid month. So, today, I had to pick one little piece that I wanted to focus in on. And I really feel that we should focus on this bold young woman. That maybe in her we might be able to find peace to these questions of why. See, Mark says that this woman had a flow of blood that had lasted for 12 years. And just for clarification, the word usage shows that this is a menstrual disorder. This is not some kind of cut that will not heal. This is something that has to do with her menstrual cycle. An abnormality that brought with it a number of devastating cultural side effects. See, this woman's continuous hemorrhaging had taken nearly every aspect of her life away from her. Possibly just in her 20s. By means of her illness, she was unable to have children. She would have had no husband. She had spent whatever money she had to try and be healed at the hands of doctors, but nothing came of it. And so she was also broke. And because of the laws regarding purity, she was perpetually ritually unclean, unable to go to the temple to worship or offer sacrifice, unable to even interact with other people around her. See, this meant that anyone who would come in contact with her, just the brush of an arm, touching her shoulder, would take on her status of being unclean, and that they would have to go through the rites of cleanliness and withhold themselves from the temple for 24 hours. Now, if that happened today, we might find people lining up on a Saturday night saying, oh, I'm sorry, now I can't go to church in the morning. But in this case, it was a pretty big deal. See, this condition had rendered this woman an outcast. It had taken everything from her. She is quite literally the furthest one could get from the privileged and powerful Jairus who sought after Jesus to come and heal his daughter. A leader in the temple of high regard and standing, but one who had stood at the lakeshore waiting for Jesus to return. If you remember last week's gospel, Jesus was out on the boat and there was this big storm. He calms the storm. They are coming from where they're at here, and going to the other side where the Gentiles lived. And there we have a story of Jesus who casts demons out of a young man, sends them into pigs. 2,000 pigs go running down a hill. It's a great story, but our lectionary skipped right over it for some reason. And here, they are now coming back, because apparently when you, by whatever means, cause 2,000 pigs to die, people don't want you in their village anymore. So Jesus is back over by Capernaum, where he had left from. And there's this crowd, and on the outside of the crowd, waiting and watching, but certainly not standing amongst them, there's this woman. See, this woman, she had faith. More specifically, she had faith that Jesus, this healer, could make her well. He didn't need to say a word to her. He didn't even need to be asked. Just the touch of his cloak was all that it would take to remove this affliction from her. If her faith was in any other subject than Jesus, one would think that this woman had slipped into delusion. A number of years back, when I was in my hospital chaplaincy, I worked with a family whose mother was coming to the end of her life. She was dying from cancer. And seeing them at lunch one day, I went to join them, to comfort them, to talk with them, to see how they were doing. And the conversation, though it started in comfort, quickly turned to a place that I was not expecting. Questions came up about rare herbs and medicines that might be found in South America, or in the islands of the tropics where certain fruit would grow that could cure this illness. Hidden cures that modern medicine wouldn't want the world to know. See, this woman was searching for anything at all that might bring healing to her mother. And I don't say this to criticize or to critique. What lengths will we go to find healing? What won't we try for ourselves or for those we love to be made well? And we see that in the actions of this woman, it is her boldness in her faith, believing that this man named Jesus could do what no one else could. And so she acted boldly. I want you to imagine this woman, who for 12 long years had taken the greatest pain to touch no one, to never bump into another individual. She makes her way through the crowd, touch after touch after touch. A place the disciples point out is filled to the point that people are bumping into each other repeatedly. When Jesus asks, "Who touched me?" they say, "Are you kidding? Everyone has touched you." Do you see this place? Because she wants to go see this healer, to touch his cloak, and she grabs hold of it, and instead of making him unclean, he makes her clean. Immediately, her bleeding stops. In an instant, the snap of a finger, she is healed. But this scene of triumph, this joy in her heart, quickly turns to fear as Jesus turns around to say, "Who did that?" See, I don't think that Jesus runs on batteries or anything, but he does feel this power leave him. He feels it go out from him, and he knows someone has been healed, but he isn't sure who. And so as Jesus is on his way to save this young woman's life, he pauses to find out who had snuck a healing. But why is he looking? Is it to judge her for not asking? Is it to chastise her for interrupting the healing of another, for budging in line? No. Instead, he welcomes her as a beloved daughter. What a powerful message. That this woman, the years of neglect and brokenness weighing on her, who could not bring herself to even ask for help, who could do no more than reach out her hand to touch Jesus' garment, in this moment where others might cry foul that she would steal his power, that she was where she didn't belong and taking things that weren't meant for her, Jesus instead, upon finding her in the crowd, looks down on her as she begs forgiveness and tells her that her faith has made her well. She who was an outcast is now a daughter of God. This is grace. This is salvation in action in the present. It was the touch that cured her illness, but it was her faith that made her well. Literally in the Greek, that brought her to salvation. Her faith in Jesus' healing didn't just stop her bleeding. It brought her into relationship. She went from outcast to daughter. By society's standards, she was worthless. But here in God's eyes, she was beloved. Our own prayers for healing and wholeness, I believe, are just as much about this relationship. That we should understand them not just about seeking God's will to be like ours, that God would do what we ask God to do, but even more so that our will would be like God's. That we would understand and see that even in our illness, we are beloved just as we are. Even in our sickness, we still experience salvation. See, I can't say that I know the mind of God as to why some find their cancer goes into remission while others do not, but I know that here in this gospel, Jesus showed God's profound love to both a penniless vagabond and a rich man's daughter. The aristocrat and the street rat both are called daughters of God. None who sought wholeness were rejected. But just on the other side of the lake, where Jesus had just left from, in the gospel story that we talked about that we had skipped, this man freed from the hold of demons, explaining to his villagers why those pigs had to die for him to receive his salvation. In that town, did sickness and death still run unchecked around them? Did those suffering and afflicted mean any less to God? No, I don't believe that they did. And even today, the child in Africa who succumbs to malaria, the woman overcome by dehydration, making her way through the desert to seek refuge, the man whose Parkinson's has finally taken control, all of them beloved of God. So what I will unabashedly claim is that our hope and our wholeness is not tied to our health or what healing Christ might do for us. Instead, our hope and wholeness can only be found in what Christ has already been done for us. That by the cross, we may not be cured of our specific illnesses, but we have been made well. We have been saved. And that God's love for us is absolute. May we have the faith of this woman, clinging to the truth that Christ can and has made us well. In the midst of our struggles, in the midst of our times when we don't feel that love, may we know, may our faith see us through, that God's love is still there, and he looks upon us and calls us beloved. Amen.